So I'm carrying on with my just going through and over some of my notes of iqtisad fi iqtisad. So here the first kutub is الدعوة الأولى وجوده تعالى وتقدس. So the first thing that anyone needs to prove before in the realm of theology is the existence of God, Allah. وجوده تعالى وتقدس برهان أنه نقول كل حدث فلحدوثه سبب. So he says here he basically gives a kalam argument here. What he's saying is every emergent thing, everything that has an origination, everything that's new that wasn't there before, that's preceded by something else, then he has a cause. فلحدوثه سبب, he needs a cause. والعالم حادث, and he's making a claim. These are all claims he's making, and he's going to justify them later. He says that the world or the universe or everything other than Allah, that's what alam refers to, is something that began, was preceded by something, or it had a beginning, has a beginning. It was newly originated. فيلزم منه أن له سببا. So it's necessary that it has a cause. ونعني بالعالم كل موجود سوى الله تعالى. And so, like I just mentioned, everything other than Allah is considered Allah. So all mawjud things, all existence other than Allah is considered, is what is meant by alam. So existence includes bodies and accidents. So these are ajsam and a'rad, or the singular jism and ard. And existence includes bodies. These can be spatial or non-spatial. So, and this is something which is expressed in many of these theology books. Razi also, in his fourth part of his book Matalib al-Aliya, where he's discussing time and space, he mentions this there as well. So it's basically a breakdown of atomism. So what he's saying is, from what we've observed, and Imam Razi, when he says imma, he says either something is spatial or it's not spatial. So it exists including bodies, and Imam Ghazali here, he goes down this road. He says existence includes bodies and accidents. These can be spatial or non-spatial, if not divisible. So if it's not if it's something which can't be divided any further, then this is known as jawhar fard, or an atom. If it's something which is made up of these atoms or can be divided further, then we'll call this a jism. Something which is non-spatial are things which inhere inside bodies. They are known as accidents. So things that are spatial also can contain certain things, attributes or qualities or properties, and these are known as accidents in theology. If it's non-spatial and it does not require a body, then that is a description of God. So now we have something which isn't spatial, and we're describing something which is non-spatial, and it doesn't even need a body as well. So from our sense data, and this is based off sense data, because you might be asking, where is he getting these ideas from? So it's based on what we observe. So things that we observe are all spatial, and we find that in spatial things there are spatial things have certain properties. And these could be mental properties or physical properties, and then we find that outside of these properties, the bodies themselves, they must be divisible into at least they must be divisible to at least something which is indivisible, like an atom or quark, as is further divided today. And this is because if you continuously go, then you lead to an infinite regress, and in the kalam tradition, they do not like infinite regresses. Now he will go on to argue for why he believes that these are actually a thing. So he says these aren't accepted a priori. Rather, sense data proves the existence of bodies and accidents. He uses sort of reporting to prove accidents. So if someone doesn't believe in accidents, so he's going to start. So we can see bodies around us, so we must believe that they are bodies. And then how about accidents? How do we know if accidents exist? So if there's an accident, it's something like an emotion, a feeling. So if someone doesn't believe in an accident and he has strong feelings against, so there's someone that is passionate about the non-existence of accidents, then those sentiments themselves are evidence that accidents exist. Otherwise, they are just non-existent illusions or non-existence illusions. So you have to either accept that they exist and fall in line and accept the position that there are such things as accidents, or you must accept that whatever you're doing and your passion within the debate and discussion is actually just an illusion and non-existent. Then he says that the existence of Allah is a non-spatial entity. That Allah isn't a body, an atom, or an accident. And then this is proved through evidence. So he says this is important. He says that the existence of Allah being non-spatial is proved through evidence and not sense data. The proof used is the kalam cosmological argument. He then presents some proofs for the second premise of the kalam cosmological argument. He argues the first premise is self-evident, that new events have causes. Sometimes people nowadays, they would say, actually, we don't accept that all new events have a cause. They might say it might be the case that we just haven't come across an event which doesn't have a cause. But then you have to explain what makes that specific event special. Why is it singularity for? And you have to give strong enough evidence to prove that that certain event is, in fact, causeless. Because how would you know that something that exists there that hasn't come into existence with a cause or through a cause? It'd be very difficult to show that. And if you can show, and if it is the case that it exists without a cause, then you have to give a reason or a convincing reason as to why that's the case. But Imam Ghazali here makes a strong claim. He says that you'll only disagree with him, like he believes you'll only disagree with him if you don't understand his definitions of hadith and sabab. Hadith just means something non-existent that came into existence. So then, in this scenario, that criticism which I said before, that there's a new event which doesn't have a cause, then this doesn't even fall into the definition that he's using, because then it's not even a new event. If something doesn't have a cause, then how can it be a new event? So he's saying before it exists, so hadith is something that was non-existent and then it came into existence. Before it existed, so before this hadith existed, it was possible or impossible. So we could either categorize this thing as something which could possibly have come into existence, or its existence was an impossibility. It could not even be conceived of or fathomed that this thing would come into existence. The latter isn't true, because an impossibility can never arise, and this is because by definition something which is impossible cannot be. That's just definitionally speaking, because you can't have a square circle. And something which is possible, jaiz or mumkin, means that which may come into existence or not, but it doesn't exist before this, or else it would be called wajib. So there's a discussion here which is very intricate. Not much people, I haven't seen discuss this nowadays, but it says if something before it exists is possibility, its possibility exists before it existed, and then there's a debate about that. I can't remember if he goes into that here. He might do later, and I know Imam Razi goes into this, but the crux of it is that because if it's possible, if the existence, if you say that something is described as a possible existence, then that possibility is, you would say, an accident or an attribute, and an accident or an attribute of a thing cannot exist before the thing itself exists. So therefore, the possibility of it existing, when we say the possibility of existing, we don't mean it as an attribute, because otherwise that thing itself would be wajib, necessary. And another quality of something which is possible is that its existence requires a sufficient reason. So today they call it the PSR, a principle of sufficient reason. So it needs a sufficient reason to exist. So if there is no sufficient reason, then no existence. And this principle of sufficient reason is what is meant by sabab. So he argues for a sufficient reason here. In ashari kalam, they don't require a super strong PSR. They hold to things like grounding, like something similar to like grounding reasoning. Like they could be an ontological, logical priorities. They do hold to some of these scholars do hold to these kind of things. So they have a PSR, not a very strong one, but a modest one, I would argue. And then the second premise of the kalam cosmological argument, or Imam Ghazali's argument, rahimahullah, is the universe is hadith. And he, interestingly, at that time, he said that it isn't self-evident, badahatan or badihan, that the universe is actually self-evident, is hadith, something which did not exist previously. And that was because for the longest time, those in the philosophical circles, they believed that the universe always existed, and that's why just until the last century we had the steady state theory. However, there is a deep philosophical argument here that still continues today amongst the philosophers. Like, were there always emergent things that existed to infinity? But they have a very strong burden of proof upon them, because the modern trend today is to follow physics, and why should we, if the physics shows us today that the universe did begin, then we don't need to say anything else. We say, look, there's ample, that's evidence, and we don't need to say anything further. We could just say that we know now that it's more likely that the universe did begin, and any claim that you make about the state before the universe is just a claim which needs to be backed up with a strong argument, a very strong argument. So it's like a reversal now. We don't need to make a strong argument to show that the universe did in fact come into existence. However, here Imam Ghazali does present another syllogism. So now when he says alam, now he's referring strictly to bodies and accidents. So previously when he said all things when he said alam, he was referring to anything other than Allah, but now he wants to make it clear that he's referring to bodies and accidents. This also excludes, I guess you could say, the Platonic forms. Something that you might know is that the Ashari scholars of theologians of the Kalimin, they do hint towards the Platonic views. However, they do not address they don't address it in every. It's not commonly addressed. It might be addressed in some kitabs, but even Imam Razi in his Al-Matalib al-Aliya, he says that the Mutakallimun, or the theologians, haven't really addressed the possibility of the Platonic realm. But I think it's a very strong claim, because we as Muslims, we are just claiming that there's one existence which isn't spatial, and one existence which isn't a spatial or an accident. It's something beyond these. Remember, we said that it was the third type. So the second, we said that there are things which are spatial or they're non-spatial, and if this spatial, so we're saying if it's non-spatial and it doesn't require a body, then this is a description of Allah, of God. But then someone might say the Platonic forms are also non-spatial and they don't require a physical body. And so and Imam Razi says this isn't really addressed. However, making the claim that there are in an infinite realm, an infinite amount of these Platonic forms that exist in a realm out there, is a very strong claim. And ours, in comparison, and surprisingly, the claim that a God exists seems modest. So now here, like I said, alam is referring now to bodies and accidents. The syllogism is that all bodies experience, acquire new events. So here's the syllogism: all bodies. So remember, bodies are spatial things which are located in space. So all things which are located in space, they acquire new events, and all things that acquire new events are themselves new events. And that's that famous saying, "Kullu ma la yakhlu an al-hawadith fahuwa hadithun." So all things which are themselves not free of or empty of emergent things or originated things or new things, then they themselves are originated. And this makes it necessary. This entails that every physical or every spatial body is an emergent thing. And Imam Ghazali finds it difficult, not difficult, sorry, he's saying which of one of these premises are actually denied. But to prove this second syllogism, so once again, all bodies experience, acquire new events, and all things that acquire new events are themselves new events. And the universe obviously is made up of bodies, so, and everything is a body in it, so the universe must also be a new event. So to prove this second syllogism also, he says bodies are either in rest or motion. Okay, this is another thing. It's about it's another part of atomism, you could say. So atomism is just this idea that things are made up of indivisible parts. Things are made up of discrete indivisible parts. There's a smallest atom for each thing, or smallest possible substance for each thing. And a part of this is part of atomism has implications on the idea of rest and motion. So he says here, and to support this syllogism, the second syllogism, he says bodies are either in rest or motion, and these are properties of emergent things. So things which come into existence, hadith or hawadith, they are in rest or motion. So theologians spend lengthy arguments to prove this, but he says the transition of accidents like hunger, etc., we perceive ourselves is evidence enough, as these are emergent things that change. So he uses a principle of intuition to show that we ourselves find that we experience change within us, So it must be the case that there is change. He also used an argument from conceivability to show that even things that are in rest are also hadith. Someone might say, okay, how about a body that's been in rest eternally? Why is that considered emergent as well? Because that's not changing. Because we can understand that we ourselves are hadith and we perceive change, and that's because we aren't in rest, we are in motion. So someone might say, yeah, I accept that things that which are in motion change and move. Things which are in motion are hadith. How about things which are in rest? So he says it's possible to conceive of things which are in rest to be in motion, right? So therefore, those things which we can conceive of having motion cannot be eternal, because an eternal thing is something which cannot be conceived of moving. See, something which is eternal, you can't even conceive of it as moving, because if you conceive of something like Allah to move, then that's no longer perfection. Is that really? Because that would lead to an infinite regress, which the kalam theologians found to be absurd and illogical even. So this is also why we say a resting atom, etc., isn't in motion, suggesting the possibility exists for it even if it were to remain in rest. So he's talking about a description of atom. He says when we describe atoms, we say it's not in motion. That shows that it's possible for it to be in motion, even if it is currently in rest.